Hello and welcome to Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast number 81. Firstly, let me apologise again for the late running of this week's show. As Facebook followers will be aware, following our nice little break away over the weekend, unfortunately both Mrs T and myself have been suffering from some rather nasty colds, and you can probably hear in my voice that I'm still getting over mine, so apologies if the quality of today's recording isn't quite up to its usual standards. This week we'll be reviewing far and away Doctor Who's best episode since the show's return almost a decade ago, and possibly the best in the show's history, Kill the Moon. And in our continuing series looking at the show's directors past and present, we'll be looking at Peter Grimwade. Coming up shortly, your thoughts on Kill the Moon. But first, Theta's Thought. The pre-credit sequence for Kill the Moon is simply another take on the Earth broadcast that's later used by Clara to ask humanity to choose whether or not to kill the moon. While this was effective initially and gave the watcher the impression that they were in for another real-time episode, such as 42 a few years back, sadly it became just a cheap gimmick when we hear Clara's real message to the Earth a little later in the story. That said, it did what it needed to do and drew me in. I really cared about where this was going. The scene just after the shuttle landing introduces the primary characters to each other and was well played out by both the Doctor and Lundvik, but I have to say she accepts him very quickly for what he actually is. It also occurred to me that the Doctor offers Courtney the chance to be the first woman on the moon. However, he's previously taken Martha to the moon landing 5 times. Now this suggests that what the Doctor is offering Courtney is simply a get-out clause or a grand apology for saying that she's not special. Or that we're getting back to one of those classic series things where the Doctor hasn't quite got the control of the TARDIS that he would like. Even he has to use his surroundings to work out where and when they've landed. Kudos to the production team for their reproduction of the moon's surface in this episode. Of course, this was a story that was partially filmed in Lanzarote, sparking a fan frenzy that the Doctor was returning to Sarn, where his 5th incarnation had previously been in Planet of Fire. But the reason for the exotic location was far simpler than that, and Lanzarote did indeed make a fantastic moon surface. As the group enter the moon base and see the cobwebs, I was reminded of something that I'd read last week about this episode. Stephen Moffat, when briefing Peter Harness on this story, told Harness to Hinchcliffe the out of it for the first half. This being a reference to the Philip Hinchcliffe era of the classic series, where horror became a staple diet for Doctor Who fans. I can only assume that this instruction filtered through to director Paul Wilmshurst too, as there were a couple of genuinely jump-out-of-my-skin moments with the spiders during those first 25 minutes or so. The soundscape too played a part in setting the mood and building the tension. What is it about the light clicking sound of the spider's footsteps that sends your heart racing, that sets up within you that something's going to happen? You know it's coming, but you can't stop yourself jumping out of your skin when it does. It says something about this Who setup that as I'm watching it again to make these notes, even knowing what to expect and when to expect it, I'm still on edge. I love the moment too where the Doctor explains to Clara that there are some moments in time that even he cannot see, despite the fact that this appears to fly in the face of the whole premise of a time-travelling show. there's an amazing look of incredulity on Clara's face as she realises that the man she has come to believe is infallible is in fact fallible. Interestingly, there's a brilliant throwaway line in Lundvik's response to what the Doctor says there. In her "these are the last of" speech, she says, "These are the last nuclear bombs." What a statement from Peter Harness, that by 2049 the world could be without all its nuclear bombs. And so to the elephant in the room. The Doctor leaves a teacher, a girl and an astronaut to decide the fate of humanity. It's a fascinating scene just before the Doctor takes off alone in the TARDIS between him and Clara, the crux of which is the Doctor saying, "It's time to take the stabilisers off your bike. It's time to grow up, Clara. Time to stop relying on me all the time." Now I know a lot of fans have really kicked off over this. There's been some real bile over the Doctor walking away like he did, but longer term fans of the show should hark back to the third Doctor, who spent 3 whole seasons trying to fix the TARDIS and leave Earth, and subsequently leave humanity to make its way without his help. So for Capaldi's Doctor to enable Clara and Lundvik not only to face their fears, but to grow up a little too in this way, isn't anything new to the show, and fitted Capaldi's Doctor like a glove. It's a great scene with Clara broadcasting to the Earth with the lights on or off scenario, though as I said earlier it does take away from the pre-credit sequence. Now again, I know a lot of people have grumbled at this scene, saying that we wouldn't really be able to see the lights going out on Earth, and what about the people on the other side of the planet? Don't they get their say? But seriously people, Doctor Who is science fiction, not science fact. If as a fan of the show you can suspend your disbelief over the Doctor being a 2,000-year-old alien with 2 hearts who flies around in time and space in a wooden box that's bigger on the inside than the outside, then you can't be picking and choosing where else to suspend your disbelief. Just enjoy the show for what it is, a fantastic piece of, for the most part, very well written fiction. The near-on closing scene in the TARDIS with Clara telling the Doctor where to go was emotional and extremely well played by both leads, but especially Jenna Coleman. Clara forces the Doctor to rethink through his actions and to see them from her point of view, which when you look at the Doctor's face he genuinely seems surprised about. Now of course there's been much discussion about the attitude of this Doctor, and what we have here is the culmination of an increasingly impatient Clara telling the Doctor where to get off. Is Clara leaving the show here? I don't think so. So with that in mind, where do we go from this point? As far as the Doctor is concerned, he'll be rethinking his ways and his attitude. But will he soften? Who knows? Although I'm aware of some fans out there who are seriously hoping so. I've said before, however, that for me, this is the 6th Doctor done right. What I mean by that is that when a similar thing was tried during the Colin Baker era, it was badly thought through and badly written. Indeed, I think it was Nicola Bryant herself that said, if the Doctor and his companion really had that kind of relationship, why would Perry have stayed? In Kill the Moon, we have that completely addressed. Clara tells the Doctor to get lost, then leaves the TARDIS. The Doctor is forced to at least think about his actions and attitude in the process, but then we have Clara being reminded that she still hadn't finished with the Doctor. Why? Because the very fact that she's so emotional and angry with him says that she still likes him. As I said on the Facebook page, for me this was without a doubt, and by a country mile, the best episode of Doctor Who since the show returned to our screens nearly a decade ago. Frightening, gripping, emotional and engaging. Definitely a 9 out of 10 for me. So if I liked it so much, why not a 10? Well, this is where I hit the controversial ground. But hey, my show, my rules. And while I'm always saying how much everyone else is entitled to their opinions, here are a couple of mine, which will just take the shine off the episode for me. The first is Courtney. No, not the fact that she's there, but the fact that she's there. Meaning? Well, within the context of the episode, I thought she was a good addition to the cast. Poorly written in one part where she complains of being bored though. However, am I the only person to be slightly concerned that without so much as a buy or leave, she takes to the TARDIS with, to all intents and purposes, a complete stranger? And also that the Doctor is happy to take an underage child off in the TARDIS. Yes, I get the whole time machine thing so she can be back before she's missed, but is that really the point? Here we have what in the UK at least would be referred to as a minor being whisked off by a complete stranger. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the message that that's sending out. And secondly, the swearing. Towards the end of this episode, we hear the same swear word repeated 3 times. Now, I'm not getting on my high horse specifically as a Christian here. Oops, there go another couple of listeners. But again, just asking what sort of message this sends out. For 50 years, the Doctor and his companions have been able to express themselves in what for them were very real situations, without the use of expletives. Yes, I know both Lundvik and Clara were very emotional, but so have numerous other characters been on the show down the years, and I don't recall them swearing to get their point across. Anyway, this for me was still a very strong episode, and Mummy on the Orient Express has a huge amount to live up to.
Come here, you scrumptious little beauty. A box?
Doctor, what is it?
I've got mail.
Koshi Oakdown Saxon, and I really hope I pronounced that right, and I'm very sorry if I didn't, was the first to feed back this week with these thoughts. Maybe not the best, but really very good and great. In a moment when the lights turned off, I wanted to kick the whole earth somewhere. Next up was Jeff Waddell, who said, "Not as good as Listen for me, but not far off it. A clever way of avoiding the meaningless phrase fixed point, which has caused so much bother." Jade Linnett commented, "I don't get it. I thought it was okay. It wasn't particularly original and followed the plot of almost every Star Trek Next Generation episode up until the Doctor left. Then I think it got better. The scene with the Doctor and Clara at the end seemed a bit off, seemed a bit forced. I thought the conversation between Clara and Danny was really good though. I just thought this was an okay middle of the season filler episode, but clearly most people disagree." Well, Jade, I wouldn't say most people disagree. I think this episode has probably split fandom fairly and squarely down the middle, so more 50-50 than most people. Ian Thomas McLean said, "The bits at the start and the end, in the school and saying Courtney can't come, were dull and yet still entertaining. Also, it had a very interesting storyline, as well as great one-liners and a good moral standpoint about us as a race, how do we kill it, etc, etc. Also expanded the Whoniverse from the person who has never written for Doctor Who, so a very good 9 out of 10. This episode should stop people complaining about Series 8. If not, then I think they need to find a new show to watch. Next week's episode looks amazing, and I'm really happy it's a proper mummy, as in Hammer horror mummy, and not a cartoon kiddie one." Finally for this week, Douglas J. Harkin shared his thoughts. "I loved this episode. I thought it was great. Although if I were the Valeyard or the Master, I'd be more than happy to point out that the Doctor deludes himself when he says he can't be involved. Clara and Courtney were from another time period. They wouldn't have been in that place and time if the Doctor didn't bring them there. Clara stopped them from destroying the alien being, but the Doctor brought Clara there from the past. By taking a person from the past and bringing them someplace they could never get to without you, and leaving them as somebody to be part of the decision-making, is unmistakably getting involved and influencing the outcome. No Doctor, no Clara, no one to stop them from blowing up the moon. On a side note, it disturbs me lately what I see in Whovian social media community. It seems like there's less enthusiasm for the show than before, but the show is still great, and the Doctor and Clara are awesome. I guess last year being the 50th and all has a little to do with it, but I really don't get all the hate for Clara, or complaining the show is about her and not the Doctor. They say her character was written in too quickly, and they're now trying to build her story. I don't think that's what's happened. It's a show about time travel, and I think they're using the time paradox of Clara meeting the Doctor and getting involved with his past, but hadn't really met until the future. In that paradox, she would start out as a mystery like River did, and then we find out her story later. Just the writers using time paradoxes as they should. As for how she deals with the Doctor, I also think the writers are working the concept of the Doctor being long-lived genius alien, therefore hence a human might get frustrated at times trying to understand the Doctor's alien ways, or not being able to see the bigger picture like the Doctor can. They're just trying to keep Clara and the Doctor from having too human a relationship. I see making comments about showrunners see the output on social media and make decisions accordingly. To me, this makes me think that they're just hating on Clara and the show because they feel empowered because they think their complaining will dictate the show. Whatever it is, I wish people would get back to being more open-minded and enthusiastic about the show. Peter is an all-time great Doctor, and I think all this complaining bothers me a little. As ever, thank you for your thoughts, and if you have any further thoughts on the show, or indeed any response to Theta's thoughts, I'd love to hear from you, either at respectthething@hotmail.com or on Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast on Facebook.
If the freighter crashes into Earth with you on board, won't it make it rather difficult for you to carry out your task? I mean, you would be very crumpled.
Peter Grimwade was a British television writer and director, best known for his work on Doctor Who. Grimwade's talent as a director was evident during his time at Truro Cathedral School. In his final year there, he was responsible for a production of The Monkey's Paw. After joining the BBC in the late 1960s, he first worked on Doctor Who as a production assistant on John Pertwee's first serial, Spearhead from Space. He occupied the same position on a further 5 serials. In 1977 he got his first chance to direct, being asked to film some model shots for the serial Robots of Death, while the serial's actual director, Michael E. Bryant, directed the rest of the serial in the studio. Tom Baker meanwhile used Grimwade's name to replace the scripted Grimwade syndrome illness mentioned in the script. The serial's production unit manager, George Galasio, later allowed him to make his full directorial debut on the episode Out of Body, Out of Mind in the series The Omega Factor in 1979. Grimwade was also at this time production assistant on the BBC's serialised dramatisation of John le Carrier's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Grimwade next directed some episodes of the drama series All Creatures Great and Small in 1978, which coincidentally featured Peter Davison, who Grimwade would direct twice and write for 3 times on Doctor Who. He then returned to Doctor Who as a director. After directing the serial Full Circle in 1980, Grimwade was given the task of directing Tom Baker's final serial, Logopolis. When Peter Davison became the Doctor, Grimwade directed him first in the serial Kinder in 1982, and then directed Earthshock, featuring the return of the Cybermen to the show after 8 years and the death of the character of Adric. Earthshock was the last time he was a director on the series. A year later, Grimwade was scheduled to direct the serial The Return, which ultimately became Resurrection of the Daleks. Industrial action finally prevented the serial from being filmed. When the story was postponed, Grimwade took the cast and crew out to dinner, but did not invite John Nathan Turner, because he had intended to take Nathan Turner out separately. But Nathan Turner felt slighted by the omission and refused to allow Grimwade to direct the story when it was rescheduled for season 21. Prior to this, Grimwade had written 2 serials, Time Flight and Mordrin Undead. Afterwards, Grimwade was asked to write Davison's penultimate story, which became Planet of Fire. Because the story's requirements were in constant flux, mainly due to uncertainty over the filming location and the cast changes, he eventually became frustrated and allowed script editor Eric Saywood to finish the serial. Outside of Doctor Who, Grimwade wrote and directed The Comeuppance of Captain Cat for the ITV children's drama series Dramarama. The play was about events behind the scenes on a low-budget television science fiction series, which Grimwade openly acknowledged was inspired by his experience of working on Doctor Who. When the BBC gave the publisher W.H. Allen the rights to use Visler Turlough in the novel Turlough and the Earthlink Dilemma, W.H. Allen offered Grimwade a chance to publish an original novel. The result was Robot, a book filled with Doctor Who references. Afterwards, Grimwade left the BBC and mainly worked in producing industrial training videos. Sadly, Grimwade died in 1990 of leukemia.
Oh, goodbye, my dear chap. I must say I've had the time of my lives.
And that's all for this week. As always, my thanks for tuning in, and if you have any feedback on the show, I'd love to hear from you, either at respectthething@hotmail.com or through the Facebook page at Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast. So until next time, when we'll be looking at new series director Joe Ahern and reviewing Mummy on the Orient Express.
There were many trains to take the name Orient Express, but only one in space.
Good morning, everyone. Your goal is to ascertain the foretold's true nature.
I know exactly what this sounds like.
Isn't this exciting?
It's immortal, unstoppable, unkillable.
Can we get a new expert?
Those that bear the foretold stare have 66 seconds to live.
Stop the clock.
Thank you for listening to Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all copyright and property of the BBC, and no infringement is intended.